great thing. And I think that what we did, really, we laid the foundations for the much more equal and fair Ireland that I think we all want to see, and for the much better deal for women and our reproductive health. I'm straight away I'm going to say something about the bill first before I introduce our first speaker. The bill is, I think is it an opposition bill? It gets pulled out of some kind of a hat that they have in there, and it just so happened that the day for the second reading of the bill happens to be the 5th anniversary. So you couldn't make up that kind of serendipity if you tried. So they're in there debating it. The bill is actually runs along very similar lines to the report on the legislation and service provision made by Mary O'Shea and presented to government quite recently. And it asks for 4 very simple things. I've lost my page there, so I'll probably get them wrong. But one of them is quite simply to absolutely get rid of the 3-day wait, which we all know is insulting and absolutely ludicrous and very costly, actually, for women in all kinds of ways. The second is also to look at that very unsatisfactory situation after 12 weeks. First of all, in relation to people where there's a diagnosis of a fetal anomaly or a fatal fetal anomaly. They want to move that 28 days after birth rule and the bill is proposing that be extended for a year. But overall and above that, in order to protect women's health and well-being, the bill is proposing that abortion be available on request up to viability. And they're saying, oh, shock horror. But that actually is what so many of us have demanded all along and will go on demanding all along. And the fourth one, Sinead, is decriminalisation. Thank you. Decriminalisation of, I think, medical professionals who are still subject to 14 years, potentially 14 years imprisonment if they do anything in relation to abortion which is outside the parameters of the law. There are other things in there which need a bit of looking at, not least the conscientious obstruction, which is in there, but I'm perfectly sure that other people will speak on this. So that's enough for me for the moment. I am extremely pleased to ask Orla O'Connor, Director of the NWCI, to come and speak with us. Everybody, by the way, has just 2 or 3 minutes. I don't know if I told you that. I'm telling you now.
Thank you. Thanks, Alva. And I think you're so right. We can't overstate how important it was 5 years ago that over 66% of the population agreed with us and wanted to have abortion accessible in Ireland for everyone who needs it. That was so critically important. And in the past 5 years, thousands of women, couples, people have access to abortion, and it's been so important in their lives. But we know that at least 775 people, women, have not been able to access abortion and have had to travel. So we know the legislation right now is causing barriers. And today, and Breed Smith's bill and People Before Profits bill is about getting rid of those barriers, and we absolutely have to do that. We want to see a situation where everyone who needs an abortion can have one in Ireland, and right now that's not the case. And not alone is the legislation not good enough, but also so is the service. It isn't good enough that half of our maternity hospitals still do not have comprehensive abortion services. It isn't good enough that people in rural areas are having to travel to find a GP who can access that service. And because of our restrictive legislation, that is so much hard. And we know from all the research that's been done, that the government have heard about in their review, that this is mainly affecting marginalised women. It's affecting migrant women, disabled women, traveller women. Women who find it harder to access services are the ones who are most affected. And that's why it's so important that we're here saying this, because we need to really shout out loud for women who are being excluded, because they absolutely need that service like everyone else. And just to finish, the National Women's Council, we want the politicians to hear. We've launched an e-action, so if you, at some point in this rally tonight, take out your phone. It's very accessible to email your TDs and to get their voices heard. And we know it's being heard because thousands of email have already been sent in the last 24 hours. So we really need strong voices over the next 3 or 4 weeks to get this legislation changed to what we need. And as I've said, every person who needs an abortion in Ireland needs to be able to access it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Orla. And that is so true. Harsh laws affect those who are most marginalised, most disadvantaged, living in most vulnerability, actually, more than anyone else. It is always the way, and it always impacts on women and reproductive rights. I'm now absolutely delighted to call on two wonderful young women, well, certainly very young for me as far as I'm concerned, who now have the big T-shirt, Safe Access Zones now, Karen and Evie from Together for Safety.
Thank you. The autonomy of women, pregnant people and abortion seekers doesn't seem to matter in this country. Our time and well-being doesn't seem to matter either. Women, trans and non-binary people have to constantly beg and march and protest for our rights, even though in 2018 we voted overwhelmingly in favour for abortion. This included safe access zone legislation, which we're still waiting for. Our reproductive health is being reduced to political point scoring, concern, commentary and think pieces from cis men who will never ever have to face an unplanned pregnancy. Meanwhile, Viagra is available over the counter to over 18s and a vasectomy can be booked online in less than 10 minutes and without needing approval from a partner. Every single person in this country has a right to access whatever healthcare they need in safety, dignity and privacy. No one should ever have to walk a gauntlet while accessing healthcare. No one should ever have to face judgment or intimidation or harassment. No one should have to wait an extra 3 days for a non-medical reason to be seen, and no one should be subjected to their medical choices being willfully obstructed. But that is what is currently happening, and it has been happening here for years. Abortion law needs to be centred around access and care. By waiting to make necessary changes, the government is knowingly and actively hurting us. Women, pregnant people and abortion seekers deserve better, and we won't stop until we get it. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Are we angry? Yes. So myself and Evie stand here before ye. We are angry women today, just like everybody here, and we are tired. It has been 5 years since repeal, and what a 5 years it's been. Women's work on the front line and in the home has brought Ireland through COVID, and yet women, trans and non-binary people's health, well-being and dignity is still not a priority. And our Taoiseach is uncomfortable about promises that he made to other cis men in that building. We are here to say that he should be far more uncomfortable about the promises that he made to us that we are still waiting for 5 years later. We voted for free, safe, legal, local access to abortion care, but 5 years on, 90% of GPs and 8 maternity hospitals are not offering that care. So it is not local for a lot of people. We are still being harassed and intimidated and distressed going to medical appointments. So it is not safe for us either. In 2015, love changed this country. And in 2018, it was our grief and our rage. And today we have hope and determination. Hope that the ministers will live up to the promises that they made us to fix the gaps in care and to immediately bring in safe access zones to protect us as we go to our medical appointments. But by God, we've got determination to fight every minute of every day until they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. Two wonderful women who have been fighting for so long for our safe access zones and who keep getting the I don't know, what do you call it, keep getting the heave from that shower in there, as I cannot think of them any other way. It did just occur to me that if our Taoiseach is uncomfortable at the moment, oh my God, what's he going to feel in a couple of months' time if he doesn't get the skids on? He is going to feel so uncomfortable he will not be able to sit down. And that is our job. It is our job to keep the pressure on. Our great politicians who are in there, who are doing a huge amount of work, are fantastic, but they need us to be out here, raising our voices, getting our feet, marching on the street, out here every week. And we are going to have to do that until this law is made workable for everybody who needs an abortion. And I'm now going to call on Mick Barry from TD, from the Socialist Party, People Before Profit. Mick, you're very welcome.
Leo Varadkar says that he's not comfortable about making changes to the abortion legislation in this state. I don't care whether Leo Varadkar is comfortable enough. I care, and we care about women, we care about pregnant people who are facing crisis pregnancies and their health needs. That is the only issue that matters in this situation. There are two things that are trying to block our way at the moment. The recommendation has come forward from the barrister, Mary O'Shea, who did the review. She's saying, get rid of the 3-day wait. She's saying, get rid of the criminalisation of abortion. Saying that there's other changes need to be made, and there's problems with putting a limit of 12 weeks, which I totally agree with. The government are saying that the bill that has been put forward by People Before Profit Solidarity tonight, they want to put it in the freezer for 12 months. Right? And what that means is that they want to delay making any decisions on this issue until after the next general election. That is not acceptable when we have hundreds of women and pregnant people being forced to travel to the UK every year at the moment. No way are we going to accept that. The other threat that we face is the backlash that we've seen from the gains that were made for the LGBTQIA community in terms of marriage equality in 2015, the gains that were made on repeal in 2018, and the backlash against this in this country and internationally. We've seen the rollback, the overthrow of Roe versus Wade in the United States. That is a real warning to everyone who cares about the rights of women and pregnant people and who cares about progress. And we see the emergence of a far right in this country who want to go back to the good old days when the church were in the saddle and women were under the heel of the state and the church in this country. There's no way we're going back, and we're no way we're accepting the line from the government in here that there's to be no progress on this. But if there is to be progress, we have to remember the words of the anti-slavery leader, a slave himself, Frederick Douglass, that without struggle there is no progress. And we need to remember that we won repeal through struggle, organising in our communities, organising in our schools and colleges, in the workplaces and out on the streets. We need to get that idea back into our heads and go back to that kind of pressure, because it's clear that we're going to have to light an absolute fire under these people if the progress is to be carried forward.
Thanks very much, Mick, and it always helps with politicians to say we won't be electing them next time round if they don't give the leadership and if they don't do the business that we need them to do. I'm very pleased now to call on a fantastic campaigner, Ruth Coppinger from Rosa, which is of course really already lighting up our streets with fantastic feminist and radical feminist movement. I love it. We need more of it. Well done, Ruth, and everybody involved in Rosa.
Thank you, Alva. I think we've all been at so many protests outside these gates on this issue. The one that I'll certainly never forget is the one that put the 8th Amendment in peril, and that was the night that we all heard the news of the tragic death of Savita. Sinead chaired that rally. You could feel the electric charge going through the air, because such was the anger of people throughout the country who gathered that night. And you would think that any humane government would respond to that tragedy and repeal the 8th Amendment, but no. It took 5 more years of struggle, protests, a huge movement that we built up in ebbs and flows, but relentless nonetheless. And we finally wrenched a referendum from their reluctant grasp. Now, I've heard too much about Leo Varadkar's discomfort since I came here. I really don't want to hear any more. But it does not surprise me one iota. We know that at every turn they had to be pushed. But 5 years ago they jumped on the bandwagon at Dublin Castle to claim the credit for repeal. And we can never let them claim that credit. So I just want to say some very quick things. We had a huge popular movement that forced the establishment to concede a referendum, and we won that referendum. And I'm certainly very proud, as Alva said, of the part that Rosa played, of the part that Socialist Party played when I was elected in the Dáil, moving the first repeal bill and so on. But now we are in a different era. We are in an era, as Mick said, of a backlash against the gains that we made, such like repeal, like marriage equality. We're seeing a rise in homophobia, in transphobia. We're seeing a huge rise in racism. And of course, in the citadel of capitalism, abortion rights have been taken away, and women's lives, the lives of pregnant people, are being gambled on a daily basis. And there is no question we will have civitas in multitudes of them in the United States. They've actually introduced in Alabama, you could go to prison if you have a miscarriage, because you'll have to prove that you didn't cause that miscarriage. Maybe you had a drink. Maybe you shouldn't have been walking in high heels. This is actually the level that we are at. The Handmaid's Tale is nothing on what is actually down the line. And that will influence the politicians in there when it comes to the abortion review. There's no question that they will, when abortion's going backwards in other cases, they will use that to justify a Conservative stance again. So on the bill that's been moved, obviously, I saw somebody on Twitter last night saying, we didn't vote for this, we didn't vote for what is in the bill. And I just want to quickly say something on that. We actually never got a chance to vote on the Citizens' Assembly recommendations. They were the recommendations that we were meant to actually have a say on. What we got was what the politicians in there were willing to give. And boy, I'm delighted with what we got, absolutely. 12 weeks on request was absolutely massive achievement. But there are still, 10% probably of people who need abortions who are being forced to travel. And that just simply isn't. We can't just shrug our shoulders and say we'll continue to export them, we'll force them to give birth. That's not acceptable. And I think it's these tropes as well, that women are fickle, that people are just going to be, having abortions. And the 3-day wait is a joke, obviously, not a joke if you're living through it. But there's a bit too much attention focused on that, in a way. The 3-day wait hasn't existed throughout the pandemic, so the sky didn't fall in, and people were able to manage the situation, and that's the least that we want gone. We need pro-choice pledges of all the parties. What's Sinn Féin going to do if they're in government, which very likely will be after the next election? We need to be putting political pressure on the Social Democrats. All of the parties now have to be asked, are you going to, bring in what's needed and what was recommended from the review? And very lastly, we need a new movement, similar to what we had in repeal, to fight this backlash against our rights. We should take and celebrate when we came together and forced, this massive change. We should take heart from that, because we can marvel at what can be achieved when people unite and move. It's an unstoppable force, and we need to come together to defend minorities. We need to come together. I just listened to Lauren, a nurse, talk about couch surfing and car surfing before she goes on the wards because she's homeless, separated from her kids. That's the depths to which capitalism has plummeted right now in this country. We need a new system completely. And if you want bodily autonomy, you actually have to be against capitalism now, because it's enforcing rigid gender roles, the gender binary, and won't even concede bodily autonomy. as well as all of the material issues as well. So I'd urge people to please step up again, like you did for repeal, and take on this challenge. We need to build a movement now to stop the fascists, the racists and the religious right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And I'm now very pleased to ask Lauren from the Abortion Rights Campaign, who has been there all along, to speak. Lauren.
Hello. Today is an important milestone in our journey towards reproductive freedom. A day to celebrate our achievements, to look at how far we've come. Repealing the 8th was a monumental step forward for Ireland. It was a victory for autonomy, compassion, and the fundamental rights of every individual. Every abortion that has happened in Ireland because of repeal reduced suffering, hardship, indignity, and human rights violations. But the laws that followed repeal leave much to be desired. The independent review conducted by Mario Shea highlights the barriers to care we knew would restrict people's access. Criminalisation, the 3-day wait, time limits, and optional provision of services continue to violate the rights of pregnant people. We will only accept free, safe, legal and local abortion care for all. The lack of abortion service provision in many counties creates huge travel, logistical and financial burdens for those seeking care. We've heard difficult stories where conscientious objection has become conscientious obstruction by those who use their ideological beliefs to restrict access to medical care. Women's healthcare should not be subject to criminal law. No other healthcare procedure is subject to so many legislative barriers. The medical profession has their own guidelines backed by science, medicine and experience. Allow doctors to put the care of their patients at the forefront without fear of criminal repercussions. And allow compassion. Those parents dealing with the trauma of fatal fetal anomalies should not be subjected to the further trauma of travel for healthcare. Care must be provided at home. Pregnant people left behind by our legislation face the biggest barriers to abortion services. Those with complex medical needs, those who require additional travel documents, those in unsecure housing situations, and those who are homeless. Our fight for reproductive justice is part of the global fight for justice, for trans rights, for housing rights, for inclusion, for sex worker rights, rights for parents, the right to have children how and when you choose, the right to choose not to have children, migrant rights and refugee rights. It's one fight, and we will not leave people behind. We need your continued support. Email your TDs today using the National Women's Council e-action on their website. Volunteer with ARC for the March for Choice. Donate to Abortion Support Network. Keep having conversations with those around you about reproductive justice and call out injustice where you see it. As long as one person is forced to travel or forced to carry a pregnancy they do not want, then there are not enough abortions in Ireland.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And thank you to the Abortion Rights Campaign for being here. And can I say, and I didn't discuss this with you in advance, it came up at a meeting last night though, we need a pro-choice march in September. And I think we need to say we're all going to get together to organise for that march. We need to get out in big numbers on the street in September. So I see a summer of planning in front of us. You are not on your own. We will be there. We will help. We will get out and do it, because we know that feet on the street terrifies them. It absolutely terrifies them because it gives the wrong message. They are not a kind government. They are not a kind government, and we have to change that. We have to make sure that women are treated, as Lauren was saying, with great care. But now I'm absolutely delighted. We didn't know if she'd get out of that place in there at all. But Deputy Breed Smith, who has proposed and I don't know what it is you call, led this bill through its second reading, is here with us. Breed.
Thanks very much, everybody, for coming outside here tonight. It's amazing. I've just come from listening to Paddy Tobin and Carol Nolan, and to be honest, yous are all a share of murderers. You've 30,000 or so yous have killed in the last few years. I mean, it's amazing listening to the language, and it's a real throwback to the debates we had over the years leading up to repeal. A complete throwback and completely irrelevant and undemocratic. So my answer to them is, sorry, you have your opinions, but the people have voted, and there is no doubt left about that vote. Unfortunately, and of course to be expected, Stephen Donnelly's contribution was extremely weak. He went on about the wonderful things they're going to do to extend the services, to make sure more GPs deliver it, more hospitals deliver it. But other than that, we really have to give it a whole year to sit down and look at this review. It's amazing. This review was called for in the legislation. At the time, Simon Harris insisted, along with others, that that must go into the legislation. We got it late, but we got it, and it's a very good review. But according to others in there, Mary O'Shea and her team are dishonest, haven't looked at the evidence, and don't know what they're talking about. So it's really kind of horrible to have to listen to that debate going on and on again. And to be honest with you, the lethargy that the government are displaying, as per Stephen Donnelly's speech there, means that we are going to have to get back out on the streets again. And I do think that building up for a big abortion rights rally in September, a march, not just standing out here, but actually getting people from up and down the length and breadth of the country to march on this place and reinvigorate the movement that we saw during repeal is going to be absolutely necessary, because they're not energised because they got up and ate their Weetabix. They're energised when they smell the coffee, and the coffee smell will have to be brought to them again as it was in the past. The only last thing I'll say to you is you're going to get loads more of this. So Deputy Smith wants to kill the babies and save the hedgehogs. That's what they keep throwing at me. But the point is, they never discuss women's rights. Women are written out of the occasion. Women's rights, women's feelings, women's futures, women's individuality, totally written out of the equation. And the government will fall for that hook, line and sinker. Why? Because they don't want to face this issue before the next election. They're afraid of their conservative backwoods people who they rely on to vote for them. And this is a political football that they're making out of healthcare for women, girls and pregnant people in this country. And that has to be said to them again and again by a mass movement that will again take to the streets. And I thank you all for helping to reinvigorate that here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Breed. And a big thank you to Breed for actually taking on to do this. It is not pleasant to be talked to in the way in which she is addressed by her colleagues in Dáil Éireann. And I think, you know, there is a cost. You pay a price when you're a TD and you take on these issues that you get so... that you're treated with such dislike and hatred. So I think a big cheer for Breed Smith, please, would be absolutely in order. And now I am very pleased to introduce our last speaker this evening, the great Sinead Kennedy, who has campaigned on this issue not for as long as me, because you're an awful lot younger, and I sincerely hope you will never have to say that you have been campaigning on it for 45 years, but you campaign all the time. Sinead, it's great to have you here this evening to finish us off.
So 5 years ago, 1,429,981 people voted for repeal. That is an enormous victory, and I do think it's important, as Alva said at the beginning, that we take a moment to remember our victories. Unfortunately, we don't get too many of them in this country. And not only was that a really important, significant and historic victory, it was enormous in terms of the scale of what we achieved. Over 2/3 of the electorate, in one of the highest turnouts of a referendum in our history, voted for repeal. So this is our victory. It belongs to us. It does not belong to the politicians in Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael who are clamouring to take credit. It belongs to the movement that we built. It belongs to every single person who campaigned for abortion rights for decades. It belongs to people who campaigned back in the 1970s, to the anti-amendment campaigners who opposed the 1983 amendment to begin with. It belongs to the activists who didn't stop after those dark days of the 1980s, who supported women, who ensured that they had access, limited and all, by travelling to Britain for abortions. It belongs to Miss X, to Miss C, to Miss Y, to Miss D, to Miss A, B, C, to all of the women who were dragged by this misogynistic and brutal state through the courts in order to see their basic fundamental human rights recognised. Tragically, it also belongs to Savita Halappanavar, who died, who lost her life because of the 8th Amendment. And it belongs to the bravery of her husband and her family who allowed her story to become public. It also belongs to the women who told their stories, particularly women who broke the early taboo. I see, who was here earlier, I saw Tara Flynn, who was one of the first prominent women to come out and tell her story. And let's not forget how hard that was. It was really, really hard in those early days, and she suffered, her and others like Roisin Ingle and other women who told their stories, they got horrible misogynistic backlash, but they also paved the way for other women who came out and told their story, and that victory belongs to them as well. So despite that, as everyone has said, the law that we got has fallen short. It is not the law that we voted for. We've heard a lot about Leo Varadkar's discomfort, and I don't want to kind of reiterate that point, but again, when have we've heard this before? And what has happened to women who made men feel uncomfortable? They were sent off to Britain, they were silenced, they were incarcerated in mother and baby homes, in Magdalen laundries. They were forced out of private life, they were forced into the home. They were told that they had no role other than to become only mothers. That was the only role that women were afforded to. Why? Because anything else made men uncomfortable. And we have shattered that glass ceiling. We have women, through many, many decades of activism, have changed that history. And therefore, just to reiterate, I think what so many people have said, if we did it then, and the scale of what we faced back in the 1990s and the 2000s, and look what we achieved. So if we reinvigorate our movement, if we join the struggles together, the struggles against the far right, the struggles for every person to have a decent home, the struggle for bodily autonomy, for decent healthcare, education and welfare, if we connect those struggles with the struggles for women's rights, just what we could achieve in this country. What sort of country could we make where every person is welcome, every person has a home, every person has bodily autonomy?
Thank you very much, Sinead, and I think that point about our standing together in solidarity, we have our issue in relation to abortion, and we have, I think women have lived through some very difficult and incredibly bitter and dreadful, dreadful times that have left their marks on us in so many ways. We know what that's like, and we can and do and will stand with others who are being maltreated, cruelly treated, and we will not stand for it. We know that we will not stand for it. My final word to you this evening, is that the only reason we have a law at all, we're asking for the law to be reformed, to be made better. But what would be the best of all would be to have no law at all for abortion. And I think that what we need is abortion to be integrated along with every other health and medical service or procedure or provision in our health services. Because a law is always about limitation. It is always about stopping it. It is always about saying you can have this much abortion but no more. And if you step over the line, you'll be criminalised. This is 2023. It is time for us to absolutely refute that, to not accept it anymore, and to say We used to say, get your rosaries off our bodies. We need to say that, interestingly, much less. But we need to shout out, get your laws off our bodies. I hope you will all go forth, multiply, build for a big march on the streets in September. Thank you all very much for being here. Boswells.